I'd like to deploy some destructive changes using the Metadata API in Salesforce, but it's a little unusual in how to make that work if you don't have the classic force.com IDE, which of course is being deprecated. It's no longer expected to be in use anymore. So how do you use the Metadata API to deploy destructive changes now? Well, let's go ahead and get into that. I've got this field in my org. It's called lame field. It's on my opportunity, and I want to get rid of this custom field. I'm going to use the metadata API to do that, and I've prepared a few things in order to make that possible. So my intention is to use SFDX, but I'm finding that with Salesforce DX, deploying destructive changes using the metadata API is somewhat challenging. It doesn't seem to work as expected, and I don't know if that's something that I'm doing wrong or if it's a bug in SFDX. However, what this video is going to focus on is my attempt to do that and then how I work around that problem. So let's go ahead and take a look first at what it is that I've prepared. I've prepared destructive changes as a package, and that involves two things. There's the package.xml, and that's what this is. This is basically just indicating that the version the API version that we're going to be looking at is 44. And then I've also included destructive changes, and that's sort of the manifest of what the destructive changes are. So you indicate a type, which is a custom field, and you show all the items in that type that you're going to remove. In this case, we're going to remove the lame field custom field from the opportunity object. So that's two elements in my destructive changes package. That's the package.xml, which declares the version of the API, and then the destructive changes, which is the manifest of all the things that I want to remove. In this case, a single custom field. And then what I do is I zip that up into a single document called deployment zip. So back on my command line, if I were to go ahead and list all the items that are in this directory, I've got a variety of things here. I've got the destructive changes.xml, I have the package.xml, but then I have the single file archive that contains those two files, and that's what I'm going to use to deploy my destructive changes to my org using SFDX. So I'll jump right back over to my org. I'll show you I still have this field here. When I jump over to fields and relationships and I scroll down, you see that I still have lame field, so that means I've got my work to do. I've got my destructive changes package that's on my file system. I'm going to use SFDX to deploy it to this org. Okay, so back on my command line, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to bring up the SFDX expression for deploying changes using the metadata API. Let's go ahead and do that now. It's SFDX force MD API deploy. And I'm going to bring up help just so that we can see everything that we need to understand for this. So let me scroll up just a little bit. So the root of directory tree of files to deploy, that's ordinarily something that I would use if I didn't have my zip file, but I do have a zip. So instead of using that directory, I'm actually going to use this -f flag here down here towards the bottom, because that's going to allow me to specify the one zip file that I've got. And then I think the only other thing that I need to do is just make sure that I indicate the target username. The target username is the target org that you're going to deploy this change to. So let's go ahead and do that. We'll say SFDX force MD API deploy, and I'll say let's go ahead and identify the deployment zip file, and I'm going to now call out my org, which I call Big 5 Dev Hub. And then that should allow me to deploy this change. So I'll go ahead, I'll hit enter on that request, and it may sit there and it'll tell me that it's queued up and it's going. What I can do to see the status of it is just go ahead and type in SFDX force MD API deploy and report, and that'll bring up the status of the most recent deployment that you've done. So I'll hit that. We'll see what it tells us. It tells us that it succeeded. It says that everything was okay, that there were no errors. The status is succeeded. I've got a job ID, but I don't need it anymore because the job is concluded as a successful one. However, when I go back to my org, I'll go over to here to my details. We're looking at the opportunity. When I click on the fields and relationships, if I scroll down, lame field is still there. So it didn't work. And I'm not 100% sure why. I don't know if I'm doing something wrong or if there's a problem with Salesforce DX as it relates to destructive changes. I'm really not sure. So what I've decided to do is make use of a workaround. So let me jump to another tab in my browser, and I'm going to bring up a tool called the Workbench. The Workbench is a great tool, but it is not an official Salesforce.com product, and they do indicate as such on the screen when you first get there. But I found it to be effective for a variety of reasons, and deployments is certainly one of them. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to agree to their terms of service, and then I'm going to log in with Salesforce. Now, I've already logged into my org, so it doesn't prompt me to log in, but ordinarily it'll ask you to enter in your credentials, and just like any other integration, it's going to ask you to allow the permissions that it's requesting in order to interface with your org and the API. I've already done that, so you don't see that here. So now that I'm logged in, I'm going to go over to Migration. I'm going to select Deploy, and I will choose my file. Okay, there's deployment.zip. I'll select that. And then I'll jump down here, I'll indicate that it's a single package, and I'll ask it to go ahead and roll back on error. Now, ordinarily, you would want to run your unit tests. In fact, it would require it to be run if you're deploying to a production environment. In my case, I'm deploying this to my development environment, so I don't have to run the tests. So I'll select Next. It's going to show me everything and ask me if I'm okay with that, and if I am, I'll go ahead and I'll click this Deploy. Now when I click Deploy, it does a little bit of work. It stands there and it waits for the results. And when the results come back, just like before, it says that it succeeded. You can go through here and take a look at some of the details, but what I'll do is I'll jump back over to my org. I'll show you that I'm still looking at the details for the opportunity. Now this time when I go to Fields and I list, lame field is no longer there. So this time it worked. And I don't know if that's because there's a problem with deploying destructive changes with Salesforce DX, or if there's a problem with the way that I'm attempting to do it. But that's how I get it done. That's my workaround. And I wanted to share that with you. Thanks for watching this video. I'll see you in the next one.